last press conference before Election Day. Today is November 7th. Tomorrow is Election Day across the country, including Kentucky. So I'm here to answer questions from you if you're here in person, and also if you wish to send in questions on Facebook, or Facebook is the way to send in a question. So I'd like to start out with a few comments about the world situation. The picture at the top of my invitation or announcement about this press conference was a picture of Taiwan and Taiwan Strait and China nearby. Oh, I should mention, I am the Democratic Party nominee for the 6th District in Kentucky for the U.S. House of Representatives. So Taiwan is a hotspot in the world right now, possibly the hottest spot that exists, even counting the current ongoing war in Ukraine between Russia and NATO. It's in Ukraine. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine, but I'll get to that very shortly. Taiwan is legally and historically, and according to the understanding of almost every country in the world, Taiwan is a part of China. And China has informed the world that at some time within the next 27 years, sometime before 2049, Taiwan will be reunited with China and all be under the same government. China would prefer that it be a peaceful transition, very much prefer that. The vast majority of people of Taiwan would very much prefer that it be a peaceful transition sometime within the next 27 years. But along came the United States and openly encouraged separatist parties and movements, individuals in Taiwan, who have been getting very close to declaring independence from China and saying, no, we are two separate countries. China will never govern us. China has made it very clear since 1973 that is not acceptable. And so we have the example when Nancy Pelosi and several other members of the U.S. House of Representatives were getting sent to visit Taiwan. We had real serious threats from the Chinese government that this was crossing their red line, and that if it continued, then China would be at war with the United States by the end of this year. It's November now. Scott Ritter said in a video a few months ago that back in January of 2022, the Chinese ambassador to the United States said, if the U.S. continues on its pattern of encouraging separatist movements in Taiwan, sending U.S. weapons to Taiwan, sending our troops there and sending our politicians there, like Nancy Pelosi and Andy Barr, my opponent, to Taiwan, China would have to take military action. And that doesn't happen very often in the world of diplomacy. You don't often have the official ambassador of a powerful country saying, if these trends continue, we are going to be at war with the United States. We're going to be in a military conflict with the United States. That's what he said back in January. And since that time, the United States has completely ignored that and continued to provoke. And there are laws moving through Congress that would simply intensify the U.S. support for separatists in Taiwan. If that happens, there is going to be a war. I'm not making any predictions whether it will happen in December of 2022 or a couple of years from now. But the United States has virtually crossed the reddest of red lines that China has. And for no reason. There's nothing that anyone gains out of this. When Nancy Pelosi was planning to visit, she never explained why she was going and why she was ignoring these warnings from the government of mainland China. And when she got there, she just babbled. There was nothing important that she said. The fact of her going there with the other Congresspeople, then a few weeks later, Andy Barr went with some other Congresspeople. The fact of their going is in itself a major provocation against the country that has, well, the most people in the world, the largest economy in the world, and the second biggest army in the world. That's China. I'll say a little bit about Ukraine as well. I have been getting a whole lot of flack from the Kentucky Democratic Party to the effect that I do not represent Democratic Party values. What are they mad about? Well, I do not support the United States sending weapons to Nazis in Ukraine. Ukraine's government has been a dictatorship or a puppet government for the last 8 years, ever since 2014, when the United States fomented a coup there, a violent, illegal coup. Ever since then, the so-called government of Ukraine and Kiev has been totally controlled by the United States State Department, CIA, Pentagon, and groups of heavily armed Ukrainian Nazis, the weapons supplied by the United States and NATO. So it has not been a democracy there. Anyone who talks about defending the Ukrainian people's right to govern themselves, defending Ukrainian democracy against invasion is talking nonsense, completely false. There's no truth to it. It's been a U.S. puppet government for the last 8 years. And all right, so I'm also told by our mainstream media and all kinds of self-described experts in foreign affairs and military affairs that, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. It was an unprovoked, illegal invasion its aggression against the Ukrainian people and their government. However, there is a provision in international law. Article 51 of the UN Charter says military force is justifiable if a country is defending itself or defending its allies. And the allies have requested military assistance.
Mhm.
Well, that's exactly what happened. For 8 years, the Ukrainian military, supported by the US and NATO, has been shelling innocent civilians in the southeastern provinces of Donetsk and Lugansk with the objective of exterminating them. They have tried to invade the area several times. These are provinces, part of which broke away in 2014, 2015. The Ukrainian army tried to just conquer them, invading these areas that had declared that they were not being governed. They weren't going to be governed by the coup government in Kiev. So they invaded, and the residents of the area, with a little help from Russia, defeated them, managed to stop the invasion, but the shelling has continued steadily for 8 years, and it's simply genocidal. Over 10,000 innocent Russian-speaking ethnic Russian civilians have been killed over the last 8 years, including, in addition, a number of fighters on both sides have been killed in this low-intensity war that basically the United States has been waging against Russians in Ukraine. So the aggressors in Ukraine for the last 8 years have been primarily the United States, NATO, and Ukrainian Nazis. And the Russian-speaking people have been trying to defend themselves, save the lives of themselves and their children. And finally, in February of this year, Russia decided it could not delay any longer, recognized the 2 breakaway provinces as independent from Kiev, and those authorities in the 2 breakaway republics immediately asked their new ally for help, which Russia provided. And so Russia has been defending itself, defending Russian people, and their military activities in Ukraine during the entire year of 2022 have been totally legal, morally justified, and a matter of self-defense. The third introductory thing I'd like to talk about is Kentucky Constitutional Amendment 2. That is the one that says, in simple terms, there is no right to an abortion in Kentucky's Constitution. That is going to be decided by a popular vote on November 8th, tomorrow, Election Day. That amendment will be decided, yes or no. What it would do is simply be another large step toward making all abortions in Kentucky illegal, with no exceptions, for medical reasons, for rape, or incest. It would be a step toward making all abortions illegal in Kentucky. And it constitutes the entire right to life political movement constitutes an attack on all women in America and most of the men. So we have one party, the Republican Party, that celebrated the June 24th, 2022 Dobbs decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. As soon as that was signed and entered, we had the entire Republican Party nationwide celebrating that attack on all women in America and most of the men. I have been, ever since 1973, I have been extremely supportive of the Roe versus Wade decision, 1973. I've been a supporter of it because it solved the abortion issue. Problem solved. It was based on reality, the problem of women dying in unsafe back alley abortions in the 1960s and 50s and before. Thousands of women. And the Roe versus Wade decision had as its main focus protecting the life and health of the woman. And it allowed states after the first trimester or the first trimester plus a few days to apply more restrictions as the term of the pregnancy went on. And many states did that. But always, Roe versus Wade said, the health and life of the woman is the paramount consideration. And states may add restrictions as long as they do not endanger the life of the woman. So, in my opinion, that solved the abortion issue for 49 years. But at about the same time, 1973, that Roe versus Wade was established, a political movement arose that called itself the Right to Life movement. The term right to life reveals their true motive, which was to consider life, to declare in the law, in the Constitution, in the law, that life begins at conception, and that after conception, the fetus or zygote has exactly as many rights or even more rights than a woman who is bearing that fetus. So this is an attack on women's rights, on women's health, and it was done in order to achieve political purposes. And since the Right to Life movement started, there have been thousands of priests and preachers who have spoken from the pulpit that your religion requires you to work as hard as you can to make all abortions illegal. There's a human life amendment to the Constitution proposed by Republicans, never was passed yet, but it could be passed soon if this current trend of making all abortions illegal spreads around, and if the Right to Life political movement gains enough power, they could someday pass the Human Life Amendment, which would make it first-degree murder, crime, for anyone in the United States ever to have an abortion for any reason. There are countries like that where the Catholic Church is very strong. For example, in El Salvador, women have been arrested, tried, and put in prison for having a miscarriage because they were suspected of having an abortion. That is extreme. It's not a pro-life movement. It's a pro-death movement. If this kind of thing happens, we're going to end up in a situation across the entire country, all 50 states, similar to the Handmaid's Tale, where women are viewed as property, as child bearers, and have no other rights except those given to them by Christian men. So anyone, I'm going to declare right now, any politician, for example, the entire Republican caucus of the Kentucky General Assembly, who put Kentucky Amendment 2 on the ballot, all of them are Christian fascists. They are trying to replace our Constitution with the Ten Commandments. They're trying to apply the death penalty to any woman who has an abortion and that woman's doctor. This is where it leads. So they're Christian fascists, in the words of Chris Hedges. I brought a copy of this book here. I'm going to wave it around. And he's written, Chris Hedges has written numerous articles. He is one of the most prominent, best journalists, authors on political and social events in the United States today. It is American fascists, the Christian right, and the war on America. War on America refers to wanting to replace our Constitution and laws with the Ten Commandments and turn this country into something like Saudi Arabia or Iran, a theocracy. So also, any Christian minister, priest, archbishop who speaks in favor of saving life by voting yes on Amendment 2 is also a Christian fascist. So I called the Archbishop of Louisville, wrote an opinion column with 3 other bishops, Catholic bishops. They all said that vote for Amendment 2 in order to save thousands of lives. They're talking about fetuses. I called those priests, those bishops and archbishops, partisan, Republican, woman-hating political hacks. I call the 6 U.S. Supreme Court so-called justices who overturned Roe versus Wade in June of this year, woman-hating, partisan, Republican political hacks. I have called for their impeachment and removal from the Supreme Court because that single decision was so bad. Their reasoning was, when you get right down to it, I read all the opinions, including the dissent. The majority, 6 of them, said, we are overturning Roe versus Wade at this time because we have the votes. It was a purely political decision, had nothing to do with the Constitution, with women's rights, with women's health, with the law, with precedent. It was a purely political move. And if 6 Supreme Court so-called justices choose to act like crooked, woman-hating, divisive politicians, then they should be impeached like crooked politicians should be impeached. Their dog's decision was totally immoral, and the entire right to life movement has been totally immoral for 50 years. They've spent 50 years lying to young women uh, about abortion. Their theology stinks, and they have to be defeated at the ballot box. So now I'm going to open it up for questions from, please state your name and
Yes.
go ahead and ask whatever questions you'd like.
Yes. Kevin Angel here. What do you know about the U.S. Department of Defense program to sponsor biological labs in Ukraine and Georgia? And where does American taxpayer money go?
All right, so in case you didn't hear, the question was, what do I think about U.S. government programs to fund biological weapons?
Biological laboratories.
Biological laboratories in Ukraine and the country of Georgia, both of which border Russia. And where is American taxpayer money going?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know all of the details of that, but the Russian government knows a tremendous number of details because they have been moving into areas where there were these biological laboratories in Ukraine. So the Russians are currently gathering evidence and building a case. And I believe that the Russian government has stated in forums such as the United Nations that some of this research was directed toward developing biological weapons, which are outlawed by international law. So that is what the Russians are claiming. The United States has responded in various ways. First, well, no, none of this was, there were no biological laboratories in Ukraine at all. And then they had to walk that back. They admitted, so the U.S. State Department admitted, yes, there were some biological research laboratories in Ukraine, but there was nothing suspicious about that. So my basic answer is we're going to have to wait until the Russians decide they have enough evidence, and they're going to put that evidence before the world, and the people of the world have to make up their own minds about whether it was illegal biological weapon development or proper and helpful for some purpose. So I think you might want to ask a question. Are you from the media?
Consider everybody else.
Are you from the media or just an individual person? All right, so do you have any other questions?
I do have one more, but if you'd like to field one,
No, that's fine.
okay.
I'll jump over the track.
Okay, the question was, who in the United States created the image of Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine, President of Ukraine, as an unshakable fighter, iron determination, standing up for his people? Well, we have in this country 5 huge mainstream media conglomerates. And then we have the public system, NPR, PBS, and the institutions primarily responsible for creating whatever image we have of Volodymyr Zelensky was done by them. In February of 2022, they launched what I consider to be a massive propaganda campaign to lionize Zelensky, to demonize Russian President Putin, and to simply have all information pass through that filter. Voices that were criticizing anything the Ukrainian government did were silenced, censored, suppressed, and voices glorifying the Ukraine were amplified. I lived through 9/11 in 2001 and the years after that. The propaganda back then was really bad. But I have never seen propaganda as bad as what has been happening from February until today. I subscribe to the Lexington Herald Leader, and almost every day, February 22nd and today, November 7th, there have been one or two or three articles about the conflict in Ukraine. Every single one of them, most of them written by, Los Angeles Times, the AP, New York Times, Washington Post. Most of them taken from these huge, extremely influential corporations. I haven't been able to find a single article between then and today that was fair and balanced and was not vicious, Russophobic, anti-Russian propaganda from start to finish. I have other sources of information on the web. People, some of them are Russian, native Russian speakers. Some of them are reporters. And they paint just a completely different picture of what has been going on in Ukraine for the last 9 months. Totally different picture. The rest of the world is not fooled. The rest of the world has learned to take what comes out of the Western media about Ukraine as propaganda. The original source of it is the CIA. The CIA has never stopped trying to control our major media corporations. And now we have a situation where it's not just a CIA operative, handing a story here, you might want to run this, to a reporter. It's a question of, it's a situation where the so-called ex-CIA employees are on the TV show themselves. They're considered commentators. Their identity as former CIA is often neglected. Nobody mentions that, and they're considered to be unbiased commentators on the world. But that is a complete violation of the CIA's charter in 1947, which said the CIA shall not conduct psychological operations against the American people. But they've been violated continuously ever since 1947. first by paying reporters and now by becoming reporters themselves. Totally illegal. That is why I have called for abolishing the CIA completely. Since 1947, it has been the worst terrorist organization in the world, overthrown countless governments, assassinated people, including one of our presidents, 1962, John F. Kennedy. The CIA assassinated him, working with other underworld figures. But probably the worst thing they've done is turn our media into propaganda institutions. For all these reasons, and their intelligence is not good either. It's all politicized ever since Bush the First, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was the head of the CIA. He politicized that, the intelligence side. I've been talking about the operation side, the dirty trick side of the CIA. Bush the First politicized the intelligence gathering, so nothing the CIA says should be believed on any topic without checking it first with unbiased sources. So you would like me to ask a question, sir?
Well, I mean, if there's opportunity for comment or question, yes.
Question, please.
Well, first, if I may, I'd like to start off with prefacing Jesus Christ is my Lord and Master.
That's good.
And I agree
I'm happy for you.
Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that their theology stinks.
Okay.
Their theology is absolutely perverse and morally corrupt. The Republican theology. It's
Okay, so do you want to differentiate between the Republican theology and Christian theology, or what are you saying?
Oh, I'm just saying I agree with you.
Okay.
You said, first I'm declaring that Jesus Christ is my master.
Okay.
But I was just saying that what you said, their theology stinks, is I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay. Have you heard the term dominionism? Christian dominionism?
No, I'm sorry.
It's basically turned the United States into a theocracy where the Ten Commandments replace the Constitution, and all other religions, homosexuals are considered criminals. It's a whole thing about changing all the laws of the United States to make them conform to the dominionists' theology of the way the world should be, the way our country should be.
Yeah, so
That's what I'm rejecting, and that's what I'm criticizing. So please go on.
okay, well I'm fully with you.
Okay.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I reject it also.
Okay.
Completely.
I see.
I believe, I'll say it again, Jesus Christ is my master, and I believe in absolute separation of church and state.
Okay.
I think trying to mix it is a terrible evil. And when you said their theology stinks, I'm letting you know that it does. The Republican, white, right-wing, evangelical, Christian theology is perverse and morally corrupt. Extremely critical.
Okay, so can I respond briefly to that?
Sure.
I am not going to condemn all Christians. No way.
Well, you can condemn me.
I didn't condemn you. So
No, I know. I'm just saying, I'm agreeing. If you condemn all Christians,
Right.
I don't
No.
condemn all Christians.
So there are plenty of Christian congregations that view the Roe versus Wade decision as perfectly reasonable and in conformance with their religion. It has always been kind of a minority among Christians in this country to say that all abortion is murder and abortion should always be illegal. That's kind of a minority position. Chris Hedges estimates that maybe 30% of the American people favor this kind of fundamentalist Christian uh, religion or sect. Okay, so let me, I don't understand this. Oh, I see. Power to legislate against and criminalizes women, men are the problem.
Yes.
Did I, is that
Yeah, it's abortion. It is a coward who legislates against
oh, okay.
and criminalizes women.
All right, so
Men are the problem. If anybody should be legislated against and criminalized, it should be men.
okay.
And for men to attack women in a situation where two people join together and create a situation for the people who run around and say, we're the ones with the superior moral compass, to turn and legislate against the other party is perverse and morally corrupt.
Well, all right. Basically, I agree with you. I think that you're making a very good point. I'm glad you made a sign. I love making signs. I have a long history as a political activist, and I make signs a lot. And thank you for your.
Well,
Thank
yeah,
you.
right.
Is there-
Tell
is
me
there-
what your time frame is, or you tell me what you need, but I'll tell you this right now.
Do you have a question?
Well, I was introduced to you, and when I saw what you said, I'm from Louisville, but I would vote for you. From what I've seen so far, I'm letting you know that if I was able to vote for you, I would vote for
All right. Well, thank you for coming out. It's obvious you feel very strongly about it. I am in agreement. I think there are some good evangelical Christians. They're not all fundamentalists. So I make a distinction between dominionism and fundamentalists and evangelicals.
you. Well, I didn't feel like you were ever attacking me.
Right.
Anything I've ever heard you say, I don't feel like you just take issue with what you're trying to do.
Exactly right. Take issue with what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. That's all I'm.
All right. Well, I thank you for coming today.
Well, can we talk about your strain, or does it have to be in a question form?
Yeah, well, we've got another question. It says, a gentleman who just arrived. Would you like to ask a question? My name is Geoff Young. I'm running against Andy Barr, Kentucky's 6th Congressional District. Did you hear any of what I said before about Taiwan, Ukraine, or
Heard what you said, but I also heard what he said, and I can't agree with anything he said.
Well, this is not for you to
No,
debate.
I agree.
Well, we can discuss it outside.
If you, sir,
Can?
if you have something you want to ask,
I'm open to this.
or say, please go ahead.
All of the people that are wanting to ask questions. We got people.
Oh, we got people online too. Okay, so if you don't have a question right now, we'll go to the people online.
Well, I think the question I'm asking is, I don't see why you would bring religion into one person's wage, because
Yeah,
that's a constitutional issue.
yeah. I'm doing it because the Republicans did it. The
Well,
Republicans turned the abortion issue, in the early 1970s. The Republican Party, Right to Life movement, turned abortion into a partisan political issue. And that's why I am simply following in that path that they started in 1973. The Right to Life movement, in my opinion, has always been a Republican political dirty trick designed
Two
to
wrongs don't make a right.
designed to make all Catholics in America and all fundamentalist Christians vote only for Republicans for the rest of their lives. That's the goal of the Right to Life movement. It has been the goal for the last 49 years. And so the entire movement was immoral at the very start and has lied to people for 50 years and is totally immoral today. And we should, I'm asking all Republicans and all fundamentalist Christians, all Christians of any kind, to support Planned Parenthood and give up this vicious attack on all American women and most of them.
Republican men don't care about solving the issue.
Okay, all right, let's take some questions from the web, the internet. Please repeat that a little louder and slower.
Is there a mechanism in place for impeaching Supreme Court justices?
Okay, the question from Kit is there a mechanism in place for impeaching 6 of the Supreme Court justices as I have proposed? Yes. The Constitution provides for the impeachment of any person who's a part of the federal government. So they are a part of the judicial branch. Legally, all it would take to impeach them would be a majority vote of the U.S. House of Representatives. All it would take to impeach the 6 woman-hating partisan hacks who call themselves justices would be a majority vote, or no, I think it's more than majority, some percentage to confirm that.
I think it's 2/3.
Yeah, 2/3 of the Senate to also vote to convict those 6. Can be done, should be done. And I'm making that demand. Thank you for that question.
All right, this question I was really going to ask about China, but I'll make it a 2-part question since you brought up Ukraine as well.
One at a time, it's easier.
With if you're going to have a hot war with China and or Russia, a lot of the concern people have out there is about the economy. Can you speak to what that would mean for the economy and how that would directly affect the country?
Okay, so the question was, if the United States were to get into a hot war, shooting war against Russia or China or both, what would be the effects on the economy? So let's look at Europe right now, November 2022. One could say that NATO is currently engaging in a hot war, shooting war against Russia, using Ukraine as a battlefield and Ukrainian army as cannon fodder. That's certainly what the Russians think. That's how they think of this situation right now. So a few weeks ago, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu said in public that we are no longer at war with Ukraine. We are now at war with the collective West. This is the Minister of Defense of Russia saying that. It wasn't reported widely in this country, but from what I have discovered and learned about what's actually going on in Ukraine, he was expressing a view that it seems accurate.
They're going to be very much louder for a minute.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you want to shout over them or pause for a second. I don't think it's a big difference. Because there's 4 speakers speaking at the same time.
Oh, okay. All right, so students are going back to the school bus. All right, we'll take a little break.
Yeah.
think there's only to the left.
All right.
They're not done. They're lower.
Let's write it down.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Taking an educational break. Students are touring the capital.
Anybody on our team wants to know what the Kentucky Capitol looks like, this is your chance.
Thanks. Okay, so we're taking a quick break. There are 4 school buses leaving at the same time,
Hey guys.
and so that's all the noise that you hear. So as soon as they pile out, we're going to continue with this. Thanks.
Rocky saw me and he turned around the other way. Yeah, yeah. Oh, well.
We don't need to if you ask a permit.
Very strict.
Yeah.
We have to set up
All right.
16 questions, something like that.
Oh, okay. Well, we can end this early.
I'll bring you through that though, once we get there.
All right, so is that?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. Back
All
to-
right, ready to resume. The students have toured the Capitol, which is a good thing. Beautiful building.
Okay, we're back to resume. Thanks for your patience.
People here today or from internet.
Well, we have at least one more question from the internet.
One here from. How can we predict the functional viability of the United Nations? Right now, most nations are taking
So how can we increase the relevance and viability of the United Nations? Most countries now are what?
right now, most nations are taking to the U.S.
Most nations now, according to the questioner, are caving into the United States interests or desires. Right? Okay, so I think the foundation of the United Nations in 1945 was a very good thing. Its main purpose was to ensure that a war like World War II would never happen again. So the foundational principle of the UN Charter has been non-aggression. And that basically, it implements another Christian doctrine from St. Augustine, the just war doctrine from what, the 200s, 300s, way back. St. Augustine came up with the just war doctrine, which simply says force, war may only be used in self-defense. And aggression is illegal. I've oversimplified it, but so the UN Charter encapsulated the just war doctrine from a couple thousand years before, and put it into as the cornerstone of international law. And so then we have to define what constitutes aggression. And I talked some about that when I was talking about Ukraine, Russia's military operation not being aggression because they were acting in self-defense of Russian people and the territory of Russia itself. If the United States and NATO had been allowed to turn the entire country of Ukraine into a giant military base with aircraft ready to take off, with missiles based there within 7 minutes flight time of Moscow, that would be something that no country would accept. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia installed, shipped in some nuclear missiles to Cuba. And the United States simply didn't tolerate it. United States, we almost went to war. This was during John F. Kennedy's administration. We almost went to war to compel the Soviet Union to take its missiles out of Cuba. Well, our missiles in Ukraine are viewed exactly the same way. Well, in Eastern Europe in general, but Ukraine in particular, exactly as threatening as the Soviet missiles were threatening us in 1962. We came very close to nuclear war in 1962. It was almost by accident that we avoided a nuclear war. But eventually, the Soviet missiles were withdrawn from Cuba as a result of negotiations between President Kennedy and Russian leader Khrushchev at that time. They kept the lines of communications open, and we did not have a nuclear war. Okay, so the question, I need to bring it back to the economic impact of a possible hot war with Russia or China. Well, if it goes nuclear, then that would be the end of our economy and the end of our country and possibly the end of all human life on Earth. It will not be, if a nuclear war occurs, it will not be started by Russia, China, or any other country. It would be started only by the United States. Russia and China have policies, no first use of nuclear weapons policies. And they will not use nuclear weapons. I'll talk about Russia's position in detail, a little bit of detail. They will not launch nuclear weapons, certainly not tactical nuclear weapons into Ukraine. They have no incentive to do that, and hundreds of reasons not to. So all the talk in our media about Russian tactical nuclear weapons is nonsense. It's propaganda. They will not be the first to use nuclear weapons. They will only use them if they see a bunch of missiles coming at them, which could be nuclear armed. You know, they see a whole bunch of missiles and heading toward Moscow and their other cities, they will launch theirs. And that means the end of humanity. Radiation poisoning, the blast itself, the dust kicked into the atmosphere, causing nuclear winter, where agriculture will become impossible and everybody will starve, just die of starvation. We won't have any crops. So that's the worst case. The economy would disappear along with all humans. I started talking about Europe today. Now, because of the sanctions that the United States and the EU have imposed on Russia, they've all failed, backfired. And now Western Europe is seeing its industries go bankrupt. They're not able to get energy at anything close to the price of natural gas from Russia a year or two or three ago. So they're about to enter a very cold winter where a lot of Europeans will suffer. And their economies are going to be, they're suffering inflation, recession to the level of even an economic depression in Europe. And that's going to come to the United States too. Maybe a year later, maybe 2 years from now. But if we keep sanctioning Russia, and there is even talk about sanctioning China for whatever invented reasons, the Chinese economy and the American economy are so intertwined that if we start doing to China what we've done to Russia, our economy will just crash. So it's suicidal to be antagonizing these two great powers right now. All the aggression is coming from our side. And Andy Barr, my opponent, spends a lot of his time insulting the Chinese government and 1.4 billion Chinese people. That's not a good way to make friends. You don't negotiate with people by telling lies about their government. So all this nonsense about human rights violations in Xinjiang province, slave labor and re-education camps, that has been investigated by people from many other countries. They've never found any evidence of mistreatment of the Uyghur people in China, completely made up out of thin air. There are propagandists who made it their career to come up with one story after another about human rights violations in China. And that's all it is. There's never been any evidence. All of these lies. But, every other day, Andy Barr is insulting the Chinese government, lying about it, and simply making our own economy weaker. Yes, sir.
Would that be sort of similar to whites' history in America, particularly white evangelicals, labeling Native Americans as savages so that you can fight to kill them and steal their lands, or labeling Africans as animals and stupid so it gave the whites right to enslave and manipulate them and treat them as subpar, or labeling Muslims as those who worship false gods so give them right to establish a holy war, self-righteous war against them. Would we have something like that?
So I think you probably heard that question. All of America's wars are accompanied by and preceded by demonization and simply dehumanizing the official enemy of the day. It's a long tradition, bad tradition. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to kill people, it seems that at least in our culture, we have to demonize them, and their parallels are very clear.
And the history of using that tool to manipulate people's minds and put them on board with their agenda.
Yeah. Okay. So, blogger in Australia, I really like Caitlin Johnstone, points out that 5 years ago, 8 years ago, we didn't think of China as a threat. We thought China, they make stuff. We import it, that's fine. We didn't think of Russia as a threat until 2016 or so. This whole Russiagate thing came up. They have meddled in our election somehow. Well, this is something the Democrats did. Hillary Clinton, her campaign, just made up this stuff. They got some shady operators to make some claims, never prove them, and they're constantly disproven. The entire Russiagate thing, which went on for like 5 years, probably still going on right now, is a psychological operation against the American people. By the Democrats in this case. The Republicans, I heard about one today, just this morning. Some Republican candidate, I think in Arizona, said that his opponent is a member of the Chinese Communist Party. That's insane. There's no way that could possibly be true. So both sides do it. Somehow the Russiagate thing, and I blame our mainstream media corporations for not listening to all the critics who are saying there's nothing to this Russiagate thing. There's no way they meddled in our election. They ran a few $1,000s worth of Facebook ads, and that supposedly swung the election to Donald Trump. It's absurd. Okay, you had a question.
My question is, why do you think the Democratic establishment is endorsing you, considering how close the House race will be and what's at stake?
Okay, question is, why is the Democratic Party, so do you mean Kentucky or the DNC or both?
I would say both.
Both.
If you feel strongly to speak to one versus the other, but that's how it would affect the elections in general in the House.
Yeah, why aren't they endorsing me when the House, the balance of Democrats and Republicans is so close? Good question. I started running against Andy Barr in 2013, more than 9 years ago. And every 2 years I've run against him. I've never gotten any support from the Kentucky Democratic Party, the KDP. I think at first the reason was Governor Steve Bashir at the time in 2014, Andy Bashir's father, realized he had known me. I worked in state government for 15 years. He had met me various times. And he realized that the Democratic Party would not be able to control me, control what I said, control what issues I focused on. I would not be a good little foot soldier. And my Democratic opponent in 2014, they could control her. So that's how it started out. So Steve Bashir did a robocall for my opponent during the primary. Said, yeah, I endorse Elizabeth Jensen. She's great. Didn't mention my name at all. And so he actually violated a statute, Kentucky statute, which says that it's KRS 118.105, Section 1, which says that the leadership of the Republican, the RPK or the KDP or any other party in Kentucky that someday has primaries. I think the Libertarians had primaries for a few years. They got on the ballot. Any party that has a primary, the leadership may not rig the primary. But Steve Bashir in 2014 started rigging it. Yes, the first one. I think it was in January 2014, right after the filing deadline closed. He endorsed my Democratic opponent, violated Kentucky election law, and rigging an entire primary, that's got to be a felony. And so we started that, and I sued the Democratic Party in 2015 when they did it again when I was running for governor against Jack Conway. They rigged it. They provided huge amounts of in-kind resources to their favorite candidate. And it just escalated. I kept suing them. I kept getting crooked judges who just threw out the case. I've never been allowed to conduct discovery in any of my lawsuits. That's kind of like in the early stage of a lawsuit. If both sides conduct discovery. I've never gotten out of the motion to dismiss phase. So so people say, oh, you've lost all these lawsuits. Well, not really. I certainly haven't won any, but I haven't lost them either because the crooked judge refused to allow discovery to occur, refused to allow it to go to trial. So I haven't lost any cases either in my life. They've all been thrown out by bad judges. That is one federal judge, Gregory Van Tatenhove, who Mitch McConnell nominated for the federal district court in eastern Kentucky. So he was at least as crooked as all the state judges were. He threw my federal lawsuit out exactly the same way. So a lot of judges need to be impeached or have their licenses to practice law revoked. Any first-year law student could tell, reading one, my complaints, and two, the decisions, dismissing them. Any first-year law student could read a few of those and conclude that all of these judges have been corrupt and have violated the civil rules and simply dismissed all my cases for no reason at all. So when I sued them, they really don't like that. That just makes them mad. And so they never came to me and said, look, how can we work this out? What can we do? How can we run a primary, basically, that you would consider fair? And I would have had very simple answers for them. Allow me to debate the primary opponent, right? Or opponents. One time I was running against Amy McGrath, Jim Gray, uh, three others, so six of us in the primary in 2018. Have us all debate, a bunch of debates. Don't, make it equally possible for all of us to raise money. But no, they didn't want to change anything. Then in 2020, I was a Republican. I ran in the Republican primary against Andy Barr, and the RPK rigged it in precisely the same way the Democrats do. So I gave up on the Republican Party, and this year went back to my lifelong party, Democratic Party, because I agree with them on more issues. The only thing I agree with the Republican Party on is I'm a Second Amendment Democrat. I do pretty well on the NRA surveys. I usually get about 18 out of 20 the way the NRA wants. Questions at the end that throw in the most extreme questions. Should we allow hunting in national forests? You know what they want me to say. I say no. So I get that one wrong. Should we make it easier for American gun manufacturers to export weapons to other countries? No. No, the laws about exporting guns should be determined by the rest of the world, not by us. So I never get a perfect score. But yeah, I'm with the Republicans on the Second Amendment to, the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution. I'm totally against them on Kentucky Amendment 2. Two different things. Right? Okay, no on Amendment 2, yes on guns.
Well, first
Yes,
off,
sir.
we have some more questions from the internet. The first is, Jerry Likens would like to know, how are the sanctions against Russia to blame for Kentucky's, or how do the sanctions against Russia affect Kentucky's economic problems?
Okay, great question. How are all these sanctions, there are thousands of them, against Russia affecting our own economy? Well, the basic purpose of these sanctions is to decrease the revenue of Russia, so they can't afford they can't afford to wage war in Ukraine. That's the fundamental thing. So reduce the revenue. Well, how do you do that? The only idea that our people in Washington have ever come up with is prevent them from exporting their products. Prevent them from exporting their oil, their natural gas, all their other products. We can stop them from exporting. They won't have any income, and their economy will collapse. Their people will suffer so much that they'll overthrow Putin. That is the whole idea behind all of these sanctions. Some were in effect before February of 2022. Some were, a lot more were added after Russia started its special military operation. All of these sanctions have failed because it is impossible to prevent a huge natural resource rich country like Russia from exporting its valuable resources. Can't be done. So Russia has obviously shifted their exports to China, India. They've turned east and made contracts and deals. They're building new pipelines all the time. And they're just not, they're not suffering much at all. And a recent agreement with Russia, which is an OPEC member, I think it was the last new member of OPEC, to reduce oil production a little bit. The price of oil has gone up. Obviously affects gasoline prices here, harms every Kentuckian, especially working people who, are not millionaires. But it hasn't harmed Russia very much at all. The quantity of their exports are down a little bit, but the price is higher. So their net income is the same or better. So it caused some inconveniences in Russia. It's causing an economic depression in Europe. And all of these Western sanctions have backfired. I call Andy Barr the king of ignorant sanctions. AIS. And that's all he does. He spends half his time insulting the Chinese people and half his time thinking up new ways to prevent Russia from selling its products. He's a complete idiot.
It needs to be, it's necessary for it to be a question of form.
Well,
Is there a reason why you didn't mention the fact that after World War II, the United States put missiles in Turkey?
yes,
The USSR.
yeah, exactly.
That's what prompted Russia said, first they asked, please take the missiles. Why are you pointing missiles at us?
Right.
And then we refused to take them out. So Russia said, well, if you're going to put missiles in our backyard, we'll put missiles in your backyard.
Right.
So the reason why you
That is 100% accurate.
didn't mention
You don't need to make a question. Yeah, that's excellent. So we had nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy in 1962.
and we had already
And we had-
a country with them. So
Right.
we showed that we were ready to use such a weapon. So we had two things. One showed that we were willing to use it if we wanted to, and the two, we placed it in somebody else's.
Right, right. So the gentleman is exactly right. But that's what the negotiations led to. When the USSR took its nuclear weapons missiles out of Cuba, the United States quietly, without announcing it, took our missiles out of Turkey. And that made it a stable agreement that defused the Cuban Missile Crisis. Very good point.
Got a couple more questions on mine.
Okay.
I'll alternate. You do it.
Some of the Israel one. That's one of your TV ads mentions 12 OPEC countries stopped selling oil to us back in 1970.
Yeah, 73, 74. Okay, so I did a TV ad that mentioned the Arab oil embargo, 1973, 74. That was just, if I remember right, 12 countries that said, no, we're not going to export our oil to the United States, mostly the Middle East.
Why?
Why? Because the
That's Travis then.
1973 war, Arab-Israeli war, called the Yom Kippur War. After that happened, after the United States resupplied Israel's weapons, Israel went on to defeat the Arab countries, and they decided to boycott the United States, not supply us with oil for a while. and change basically get a better deal from then on in terms of oil prices. We were getting oil really cheap. After the 73 war, they did this embargo to basically to improve their economic clout. So the prices of gasoline during the embargo quadrupled, and that had an incredible effect. You know, there were long lines at gas stations. You could, depending on your license number, you could only get gas on every other day. Everybody else could get it on the other day. You know, they had to do alternate. They had to do rationing. People were very upset. And so if China and Russia were to get together with other countries and do an embargo on a whole bunch of products, 100 countries won't sell us anything. That's the end of our economy. We will, we'll have to make do with what we can produce here. And our manufacturing is not here anymore, a lot of it. A lot of it has moved to Asia, Mexico, as a result of free trade agreements and all that. We don't have much of a manufacturing base here anymore. Our economy would crash. If we keep provoking China, the effects here will be unimaginable. So can I get a time check?
I have no idea.
344.
Okay, well,
You want to do the last couple
we should
questions?
wrap it up. Yeah, we should wrap it up here.
I don't need the sheer wave when it went by the way. Okay, so could you give us a little bit of overview of what you think is going on, or what your opinion is, what's happening in Iran right now?
Okay. Yeah, the question was what's my opinion or view of what's happening in Iran? I question the Western narrative on Iran as much as I question it on any other country, Ukraine, China. I don't think we're being told the truth about what's going on there. It could be another color revolution where the CIA and other organizations are fomenting violence, which the Iranian authorities then have to respond to.
You say the CIA.
CIA, yeah. It could be Israeli Mossad, the British MI6, all of them. Could be fomenting violence in Iran. And all I would suggest is if you read something in our mainstream media or hear it on a mainstream TV station or radio, don't believe it unless you've checked it out with some kind of reliable source. Yes, sir.
In regard to the U.S. and Iran situation, can you inform me how things always start the timeline of conflict between the U.S. and Iran, only at the Iranian Revolution, and they always, all along, from top down, side to side, always lead back when the United States took out the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammed Mossadegh, put him on house arrest, he died in his home. They buried him in his living room, and then the U.S. put in the puppet Shah Pahlavi, how it's pronounced, who imprisoned, tortured, and murdered the Iranian people at the behest of America for over 20 years. Can you explain to me why Republicans always link that part of the history?
Okay. Another great observation about international affairs. So, the history of Iran did not start in 1979 with the Islamic revolution. Gentleman pointed out that the United States actually it was, the British and American intelligence agencies in 1953 overthrew a democratically elected moderate president in Iran and replaced him with a dictator, the Shah. And, you know, uh, did some things to modernize the country and also set up Savak, the torture organization, the secret police that would arrest and torture and kill any Iranian who opposed his rule.
Whose hand was being held by the CIA.
Right, yeah, CIA was involved in all of that. Yeah, good observation, exactly correct. And there's a parallel today. People, a lot of Americans think the entire conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as they see it started on February 22nd, 2022, they leave out the 8 years before the Ukrainian shelling of civilians. They leave out the parts that don't fit the narrative. That's my simple answer. There's a narrative. If you watch TV and you look at what they're saying or listen to what they're saying is what they want you to believe, what the CIA wants you to believe, what the federal government, the military-industrial complex. What you hear on TV is what the powers that be want you to believe. Really as simple as that. And they leave out whatever they want to leave out that doesn't quite fit with the narrative they're trying to convey.
Well, really, the American right psyche, perverse, morally corrupt psyche, started well before that.
Of course.
And they said, and it continues into this now. How people believe or not ask questions is, oh, the Indians wanted to move off their land. They wanted to.
Yeah, the slaves were all happy. They didn't mind being enslaved, all that stuff. Narrative. So I think that the propaganda got worse about the time of World War I. I think that's when the public relations industry started. It was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who started the idea of shaping the public mind. And they've been practicing it for more than 100 years. They keep getting better all the time. So I talk to radicals, people who know that they're being lied to on this issue, that issue, half a dozen issues, and then she said, "But aren't they oppressing women in Iran and imprisoning them, killing them because they weren't wearing the right headscarf?" So it's so easy to be sucked in to the narrative. There's this person who's radical on every other issue, but she's a woman and she sees what's being shown on TV about Iran and what's being said about it. So she was vulnerable to that aspect. That they find everybody's weak spot and appeal to it. And, so Fox appeals to the people who love Donald Trump and think he was some kind of renegade, challenging the system. He was not. He was just as much of a war criminal as Cheney and Bush, Barack Obama. Trump was equal to them. Joe Biden, they're all war criminals. They're all aggressors. They all will overthrow a government at the drop of a hat just because they can. And Russia You know, Putin has said several times, it doesn't matter who your president is. We don't care. Because the same policies get implemented regardless of who is in the White House. They don't control the country. It's the bureaucracy that does. The Russians use the word bureaucracy. We call it the military-industrial intelligence media complex. But it's the same thing. It's the law, also called the law in Washington. You know, they really run things. The president is a figurehead. So, yeah, until now, that's been true. From 1946 till today, the president has been a figurehead. And the same people behind the scenes really decide what our policies will be.
Well, it's the same reason into the rant that we were talking about the Iraq War, that Democrats would be prone to holding the hands of the Republicans to send us into a morally corrupted worst act.
Yeah, that was until recently. I think the U.S. invasion and conquest and occupation of Iraq was the worst set of war crimes in the 21st century so far. Yeah, both parties, totally bipartisan. There always seemed to be enough votes to raise that so-called defense budget by another 20, 30 billion dollars. They always have just enough votes. Yes, another question before we wrap up. We do need to finish.
I've got two questions on here, maybe kind of hit them quickly. Jerry asked, how can we go about closing down NATO?
Okay, it's a question. How can we go about closing down NATO? Well, it would be easy if the United States were to quit, then it wouldn't be NATO anymore. That's the best way. Just withdraw from it, get all of our troops out of Europe, all of our bases, turn the land back over to the host country, and definitely get all of our weapons out of Europe. And the other countries, I don't know if NATO would continue to exist after that, but let's assume it does. All of the other countries who are left would then have to figure out how to, first of all, they'd have to figure out what threats they're facing. And then once they figured out that they don't have many threats, military threats against them, Russia is not a threat to them, they could then figure out, how much to cut their own military budgets. Another option would be to, I think quitting NATO is the best thing the United States could do.
Last question.
Last question. How can we get big money out of politics and get more people to the polls?
Okay, two questions. How can we get big money out of politics, and how can we get more people to vote? Certainly the two are related. I'm going to talk about the money. This is an incredibly important issue, but I think, all right, so certain Supreme Court decisions have to be overturned, which opened the floodgates, which reduced, eliminated limits on how much money corporations and wealthy individuals could contribute to political campaigns. Other countries have much better campaign finance laws than we do. We have to get rid of Buckley versus Vallejo Supreme Court decision, 1976. Have to get rid of Citizens United. I think that was 2010. And if we can impeach and remove the 6 Republican, woman-hating, partisan political hacks who are now on the Supreme Court, it'll be much easier to have the 3 good justices go back and review and overturn all those bad decisions from the last several decades, or as many bad decisions as there are, we can get rid of all of them. Well, there's only 3 justices, maybe 4. So impeaching those 6 is pretty key, and it's an important demand to make. I'm going to keep making it until it happens. Now, short of that, there are other ways on my website, which is Young for Kentucky, YOUNG, the number 4, KY.com. I have a section on campaign finance reform, and it refers to a group that has been working on this, thinking about it, how we could change laws that would kind of get around these Supreme Court decisions, and all that should be done. I think ranked choice voting would be something we should institute, especially in primaries. And all kinds of things could be done to get big money out of politics, but the way really to get it out is to impeach those 6 crooks.
All right. Anybody else?
Okay, thank you. We're going to wrap it up. I thank everyone who was watching online, everyone who came today, reporters, everybody here participated. So thank you all. And, don't forget to vote if you haven't already. Vote tomorrow.
Thank you.
Oh, glad you made it.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Erickson.
Just that.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, nice to meet you. Appreciate what you have to say. I saw you online after somebody introduced me to you, and we were on the Jimmy Dore show.
That's right.
I really liked what you had to say. It resonated with me. Can I introduce myself? My name's Erickson. And can I also introduce myself with something else?
Sure.
All right, thanks for watching, you all. I appreciate it. Live here from the Rotunda at the Capitol. That was Geoff Young giving a press conference about China, Ukraine, abortion, and everything else. So make sure you're sharing this out to everybody in the 6th district. Make sure you get out, vote tomorrow. Until next time, you all.